Now from Chicago, White House senior advisor Rahm Emanuel. Friday, he spoke to an audience of the City Club of Chicago about the policies of the Clinton administration. After his remarks, he answered questions on a variety of topics, including campaign finance reform, healthcare legislation, and the Independent Counsel Act. This event runs 40 minutes.
I obviously love the Kennedy books, the Clark Clifford books, the Doris Kearns, Goodwin Histories, the LBJ books, and the Schlesinger Histories are all in the same category. And our guest today sits in the most advantageous seat from which to write that history of the Clinton administration. I don't mean a tell-all, but a serious analysis of the Clinton years. They are monumental. A balanced budget, for one. We in Chicago have been very fortunate to have a number of high-level eyewitnesses to American history. Harold Ickes, Scott Lucas, Everett Dirksen, Dan Rostenkowski, Adlai Stevenson, and Sid Yates, to name a few. But I don't believe we ever have had a Chicagoan in the office next to the Oval Office. To achieve what our guest has achieved is an incredible feat. I don't know where our guest's first office was, but there had to be an awful lot of high-powered offices for him to pass before he got where he is today. That is an impressive feat. In the course of his duties at the White House, our guest today has been deeply involved in all the historic political and governmental accomplishments of this administration. He serves as senior advisor to the President, coordinator of White House initiatives on welfare, crime, immigration, drug policy, and the Middle East peace agreement signings. He directed the White House initiatives on the North American Free Trade Agreement, the crime bill, the assault weapons ban, immigration, and welfare reform bills. Additionally, as a spokesman, can I tell him you're going to be on Meet the Press on Sunday with Charlton Heston? Charlton, I'm sorry. The President has many spokespersons. His press secretary, the Secretary of the Treasury, a slew of lawyers, including Bob Bennett and many others. But the President has no abler or more forceful and more effective spokesman than our guest today. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the City Club of Chicago the senior advisor to the President of the United States, Rahm Emanuel. Good job, good job.
Jay, I want to thank you for that introduction. It's introductions like that I wish my parents were here for, because I know if my mother heard that, she'd be proud. If my father heard that, he'd be amazed. With an introduction like that, I'm sure to be guaranteed my own investigation by an Office of Independent Counsel. You know, it's a little hard to hear an introduction like that, given somebody like myself still refers to the name Pisher and answers to that name. And for those of you who are Yiddishly challenged, I recommend table number 5 for a translation. You know, Jay has a unique talent to do what I refer to as long-term scheduling. It is so fortuitous to have this scheduled on the day in which the Chicago Bulls will probably be playing the last game. Jay, that is what we call at the White House long-term scheduling and strategic planning. What I would like to do is give the prepared remarks, and as Henry Kissinger once said, then take some questions for my answers, and go that route. Or does anybody have any questions for my answers? But basically, let's do the remarks, try to do 10 minutes there, and then try to answer the questions that you have, and hopefully make this informed for everybody. And given that what you said on Meet the Press, I have to notice an fellow colleague of mine from the White House, Jose Cerda, who's here. And I'm sure Jose Cerda now knows he has a job to do, since I have a Meet the Press performance on gun control to do Sunday, and Jose does criminal justice policy. Jose will be working fortuitously for the next 48 hours on facts. But it is always, always a pleasure to be home. For more reasons than you can imagine, it is great to be back in Chicago, especially today. It will be the game of the decade, no doubt. But even more than that, and even more than the unbreakable cords of family and friends, I still love Chicago for another reason. Chicago is real. Chicago is a city that values results. I believe that is why the president has always been well received in Chicago. Today, I want to talk with you about the model of political leadership this president has brought to Washington and what it has done for this country. More specifically, about how President Clinton has challenged the orthodoxy of both parties and forced them to think anew. President Clinton has worked to bring Chicago-style practicality to Washington, taking on the outdated orthodoxies that had blocked progress for too long. He has challenged both parties to be more pragmatic and to be more effective. When he ran for president in 1992, he ran on a ticket that called for fiscal reform, safer streets, and a welfare reform system that reflected our values. A new philosophy that pursued a third way between the two parties. Think of what we admire about Mayor Daley. Under our mayor, politics has made the streets of Chicago safer, the schools better, the neighborhoods stronger. Mayor Daley has done these things by using the political system in the best sense of the word, organizing constituencies, forming a consensus, forging solutions. In this style of politics, it is this style of politics I believe in, and it is this style of politics that drew me to President Clinton. I can still remember the day and the afternoon in '91 when then Governor Clinton came to Chicago to tour public housing with Vince Lane. He was already being talked about as a possible presidential candidate. He came to Chicago to praise the public housing sweeps policy that Vince had put in place. He openly supported a strong law enforcement presence and approach in safety for public housing. Then and there, I decided I wanted to work for him. I thought he could do for America what Mayor Daley was doing in Chicago. And when Bill Clinton said he wanted to run for president to end the brain-dead politics of both parties in Washington, it was music to my ears. It was music to the voters' ears, too. Now that he's redefined the Democratic Party, moving it back to its historic position of being the mainstream party, he had the guts to tell people in his own party and strong and important constituencies in his party that he supported NAFTA and why. He had the guts to tell his own party that he wanted to change the welfare system by putting work and responsibility back into the system. He had the guts to tell his own party he supported the death penalty for violent crimes. And he had the guts to put 100,000 cops on the street and embrace law enforcement. But he also challenged the Republican Party to think anew and to give up old sacred cows. This president had the guts to persuade some in the Republican Party that we had a responsibility as a country to working parents. And today we have the Family and Medical Leave Act as law and as a law on the books. He had the guts to take on the healthcare industry. And as a result, we have portable healthcare insurance in this country. And it was this president that challenged the Republican Party to understand that work had to pay, and we finally got a raise in the minimum wage. In each of these issues, from crime to the economy, this president challenged both parties to think pragmatically, to give up their long-held positions which had led to gridlock in Washington, a gridlock that had snapped our economy of its zest and led to a society that was literally falling apart at the seams and coming apart. President Clinton adopted a new approach and constantly sought a third way. He was able to put this country's fiscal house in order. He reduced the deficit while at the same time providing tax cuts and credits for working Americans. Washington moved past the budget debates of the 80s. In what was perhaps the single most important vote of his presidency, the vote for the 93 economic plan, not a single Republican supported the president's package. Not one. And at the time, historians and political scientists couldn't find another time in American history when an important law passed without a single vote from the opposition. Not once. Leading Republicans predicted at the time a recession or a depression. They said the economy would be so ruined the grass would grow in the streets. All this about an economic plan that reduced the deficit by 2/3 through a combination of spending cuts, targeted tax increases borne primarily by the wealthy 1% of the nation, and long overdue investments in education, job training, and technology. Of course, the plan has worked. 16 million new jobs, inflation low and stable, family incomes beginning to rise, unemployment at a 30-year low, and the federal budget in balance. Just this week, Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan said, and I want to quote, "The current economic performance, with its combination of strong growth and low inflation, is as impressive as any I have witnessed in my near half-century of daily observations of the American economy. My friend, that's as good as it gets. It's about as good as it can earn a report card that can make my mother's refrigerator door." You'd think, based on the remarkable success of this economic plan, that the posturing politicians in Washington would have learned something. When the president proposed his crime bill, his common-sense approach said to liberals that tough punishment and more police were essential to anti-crime success. And he told conservatives that smart crime prevention and gun controls had to be part of any strategy. In Chicago, we would see this as sensible and common sense, but too many in Washington saw it as an opportunity for more partisan posturing. Through hard work and dozens of individual acts of political courage by members of Congress, the president was able to pass his 1994 crime bill. And the results, I think, speak for themselves. Murder is down 25%. Violent crime overall, down 15%. The Brady bill, 250,000 fugitives and felons have been denied handguns. Here again, the president called on both parties to approach an intractable problem in a new way by rejecting long-held party positions. Both parties refused to believe that we could transform the welfare system, a system that had strayed far from its original values. So far, it would have been unrecognizable to Franklin Delano Roosevelt or LBJ. But this president changed welfare as we know it. President Clinton put in place a welfare system that honors our values, rewards work, and moves people from dependence to independence. And because of his reforms, the percentage of our citizens on welfare is at a 30-year low. I can go on and on, from fighting teen pregnancy to fighting drugs, from expanding educational opportunities to expanding trade, from empowering parents to limit violence that assaults their kids on TV, to empowering communities to reclaim toxic work sites. The Clinton approach is working. Think about it. If I had come to you on Inauguration Day 93, rather than you to me for tickets, and promised you that the Clinton-Gore team would bring this country the lowest crime rate in 25 years, the lowest welfare rolls in 27 years, the lowest unemployment rate in 28 years, the first balanced budget and surplus in 29 years, the lowest inflation rate in 32 years, the smallest government in 35 years, the highest home ownership in American history, and oh, by the way, along the way, we'll open doors for college to every American willing to work for it and make dramatic advances for peace, freedom, and security in the world. You'd have said, I don't believe it. Well, believe it. Those are the facts. Benjamin Disraeli once said that a leader must know himself and the times. President Clinton is a leader uniquely suited for our times. Not a slave to an outdated orthodoxy, not rigid in the throes of some irrelevant ideology, but deeply committed to a set of middle-class values that inform his agenda. There's an old saying that if you want to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. The American people were hungry for leadership, and I'm proud that in providing that leadership, President Clinton broke a few eggs. I believe President Clinton's style of leadership will be the model for political leadership in the 21st century. His willingness to break with established orthodoxy has fundamentally redefined the Democratic Party, and I believe our nation. The whole world is watching. From Tony Blair in Britain to Fernando Henrique Cardoso in Brazil, bold new leaders all around the world are challenging old ways, breaking with devotion to the ideologies that no longer suit their needs or our times. The interesting question, the thing to watch the next few years, is whether our friends in the Republican Party will have the courage to change. It would be ironic if the political parties and leaders from around the world would follow the Clinton model, but the other great American political party did not. As you well know, some dear friends here, I'm not in the business of giving the Republicans advice. But it seems to me they face the same choice we Democrats faced before we nominated Bill Clinton: change or die. Indeed, I think the current fixation on the politics of personal destruction is the last gasp of an old orthodoxy, an effort to hold the party's various factions together temporarily despite the fact they've run out of ideas. But in the long run, the only hope for the GOP is to find bold new ideas, as we Democrats did under Bill Clinton and Al Gore. It is my hope that the politics of the 21st century will not be dominated by the endless attacks we see today. Rather, I think a renewed Republican Party can follow in the footsteps of the rejuvenated Democratic Party, throwing out its old and failed ideas. I hope my son Zachariah will grow up to practice politics in an age in which principled progressives and conscientious conservatives meet on the battlefield of ideas, to debate how best to make Washington work as well as Chicago does. Thank you very much.
We'll take questions from the audience, and when you, I'll recognize you. Just raise your hand, say who you are, and Rahm has consented to have a percentage of Republican questions, albeit a percentage equal to the last vote in the mayoral election. So, but it'll still, since we're nonpartisan now, that does take away from that. But I'll ask the first question, which is always, I think, on the mind of a lot of us. Given all the stuff that's going on in Washington, Rahm, not dealing with public policy or even politics, with all these investigations, one of the most amazing things to a lot of us is the ability of not only the president but people like yourself to focus, to keep your focus. Is this like meetings every day? Do you separate what Mr. Starr's doing with what the policy and the politics of governance is all about? How do you organize and structure that? Or do you?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things, I mean, if you...
I'm right behind you,
yeah,
right?
Right,
I'll be okay. I understand. It's all about how do you organize and structure that? Or do you?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things, I mean, if you...
I'm right behind you,
yeah,
right?
Right,
I'll be okay. I understand.
Even if you didn't ask a question, I prefer you right there.
Yeah.
Okay, Paul.
Hey, Rahm, I won't respond.
Okay, I think, look, I really do think, you know, there's a couple ways, I mean, to answer that. I think the most forthright, look, this president, from the day he announced, a number of people here who actually early supporters of the president, he has been under personal assault from his political opponents, both in the campaign, while he's been president, in the campaign and re-election, as well as afterwards. I'd be less than frank if I didn't say we actually have practice. I mean, we now know you separate. There's a group that deal with the scandal. You literally take it out from the day-to-day governance, and I think that it allows the rest of the process to move forward. Obviously, there's people like myself who go back and forth. I have a title as Senior Advisor to the President for Policy, and I won't give that up in the sense not for the title, but the responsibilities of it. And I think this is a president who has, you know, I've watched up close, and I see, I mean, there are days I am literally shocked at his ability to stay focused. And the things that are on his table and on his desk are literally the things that I think all of us as members of families talk about. Schools, education, the economy, security, not just personal, but retirement security, health care. And I think, you know, that says a great deal about this person's character. That through, you know, he in 1992, I think a number of us had seen him in New Hampshire. And you go back and think about what this country's economic and social status was at that time. And he said in New Hampshire a pledge that I always in moments remember. And he said, the hits I take would be nothing. This was right in the middle of a period of time that was pretty bad. And he said, there'll be nothing like the hits your kids are going to take if we don't turn this country around. And he had an agenda. And I've never seen a person in any level of my political life take the type of hits or have a type of campaign run against them in a constant way for 6.5 years. But it is his set of ideas. They have literally left the battlefield of ideas to his arena because they will not challenge him on that battlefield. And he has an agenda for America, and I think the country's responded to it, and he has an amazing ability to not be deterred from that agenda and willingness to have his ideas put forth and be challenged in that sense. And I have a great deal of admiration for his courage to get up every day and stay focused on why he thinks he got elected and what he wanted to do for this country.
Very good answer. Questions?
Plus, swimming a mile a day for me helps me keep obviously focused.
Let the record show I did go to Mr. Emanuel's left.
Okay. There's one back there. Go ahead.
Where do we raise your hand?
Right here.
Youngster in the back.
Hi, I'm Mitch.
Stand up, stand up, stand up.
My name's Mitch. I'm an intern at City Club. I go to DePaul. What's the Clinton administration's policy in regards to Havana with their constructive engagement policy towards China? Are they going to take on the Foreign Relations Committee and try to bring to Cuba what they believe they're bringing to China?
They're actually not the same. And if you go back actually in an interesting way, during the 50th anniversary of Meet the Press, the President did a special interview with Tim Russert. It was a similar question that Tim Russert had asked the President. And there's a fundamental difference that I wouldn't make Cuba and China corollary. In China, the reason we have an engagement policy is they are literally in the throes of change. And that's just not true about Cuba. They are not in the throes of change. They have not decided to change either their political system or their economic system, and they aren't open to that type of change. China is in the throes of a change, both economically and politically, and the President, I think, has chosen a policy of what is called principled pragmatism and constructive engagement to deal with China in that change. China will pick its own course, but as we engage them today, we can be influenced to make them a responsible member in the international community. And that's just not so about Cuba because Castro hasn't changed either politically, economically, or socially. And so the connection isn't the same. And if Cuba was to be open and beginning to reevaluate where they are economically or politically, that's a different question. That course hasn't been chosen. And we continue the policy of isolation that we have because they haven't opened themselves to the change that China has. And I don't think they're comparative in any ways. The balance and scales aren't the same.
Yes, Frank.
Frank Paul, we have about 4.5 months before the midterm elections. I was just wondering if you could comment on the president's strategy towards the upcoming elections. Are there specific candidates that you're targeting? Are there specific states that you're targeting?
If I told you, I'd have to kill you. So, Paul, you have a second question? Yeah. You should consider the risk of the question. Well, I think, look, I think if you look at 1992, 1994, 1996, I think will be true for 1998. The best strategy for dealing with the elections is good governing. The American voters are extremely pragmatic. That's what 92 was about, and in many ways part of 94, not part, in large part, and also 96. They are very pragmatic, and they have told both parties, we want you to focus on what matters to us. Now there's a slew of issues, both on the value side, the economic side, the social side, the criminal justice policy side, the welfare side, the healthcare side, the retirement side, foreign policy area, but they are very pragmatic in the sense they want parties and candidates that literally are putting forward ideas. And I think if you ask me, what is the strategy for 98? Good government. It's also going to be good politics.
Yeah.
Dave Lundy. I have two questions. First of all, do you think we should abolish the office of the independent counsel? And I'm not talking about Ken Starr. I mean, for the future. And the second question is, How delighted were you people at the White House with Dan Quayle's comment last week that the Republicans would nominate somebody in the year 2000 to defeat Bill Clinton?
Not even Dan Quayle can eliminate the 22nd Amendment. I think that, you know, on the first question, on the office, I think the one thing that you can compliment Ken Starr with, and he will go down in legal history for, is that you now have a bipartisan consensus, I think, emerging, that this will be the last office of independent counsel, and that will be his footnote in the legal history, in the legal journals. And I think that there's for a reason, and I think that whatever its origin may be, it is now far afield, and I think that whether it's eliminated, it clearly will be reformed, and I think that's something Congress will evaluate, and they'll make their own choice. But there's no doubt in the conduct of this office, he has led, I think, both parties to want to look anew at this office and what it's done. Yes, sir.
Mitchell Shanko. When Zachariah graduates medical school and joins me in practice, because
You'll be paying for it.
his father didn't get into medical school and he had to become a politician. The question is this. As a senior orthopedist, I can volunteer in Africa, Mexico, and South America. But as a semi-retiring orthopedist in 5 years, I can't volunteer in the city of Chicago. Would the administration be willing to support an initiative so that the not-for-profit physician would be relieved of these liability burdens to some extent so that they can dedicate their time to the soup kitchens, to the Cook County Hospital, to the care of an indigent? Because I could do that in a foreign country today, I can't do it here.
One of the things I learned in Chicago, but don't, you know, you should practice more, people should practice more in Washington. I don't have the answer to that. I have an ability to tell you I'll look into it. It makes sense, it's common sense. I'm not going to say we're going to support it. That's not, I don't make those decisions for the president, but obviously it's a good question. And if there's people with resources and talents that want to contribute something to their community, you know, and give something back, that's something obviously the president supports. And I will obviously look into it, but I'm not going to give you a yes or a no, but I'll definitely give you a commitment that I'll look into it.
Harold Burke.
Mr. Emanuel, a vast number of Americans heartily protested the decision of the Supreme Court when it rendered its unanimous opinion refusing to constrain the prosecution of the Paula Jones suit on the premise that that would not interfere with presidential obligations. And yet, after listening to the marvelous litany of achievements of President Clinton as enumerated by you, doesn't that sort of vindicate the decision of the Supreme Court?
No.
That's called hardball to hardball.
But it was delivered with verve. That's what I like. Go ahead.
And cogent. Yes, ma'am.
I am Rahm Emanuel, Special Assistant to the President at DePaul University. And I'd like to pose a question. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled that Secret Service officers aren't immune from the grand jury process.
I really hope Jim Russell is not one. That's bad, yeah.
I would like to know if this ruling, one, has affected your role and your relationship with President Clinton and the role of President Clinton's other cabinet members in terms of what he shares with you and just in general your work relationship.
Well, my ability to work with the president has not been affected by these decisions. And that's a determination, you know, that he and I can speak for myself and colleagues I see. I think you'd be comforted by knowing as a voter and as a citizen of this country that the work goes on and the work is not stopped or prevented by these decisions. And I think that that's, if you're asking for, you know, what's the impact, It has not impacted my ability to work with this president. Just today beforehand, when we worked on a slew of issues, as I did last night, late into the evening, on some environmental concerns, on some health care issues and policy developments, and ability to interact with the president and go over his remarks related to that. So it hasn't impacted in that sense. But that, you know, that's not really an answer in the sense that that decision is on a Secret Service is one matter. I'm not going to address that, and I have to be very careful, as you can well imagine, ongoing case.
Larry Gorski and Paul, I'm not going to see you.
Okay, Larry.
Ron, 3 years ago this month, the president was on the west side at the Austin District Police Station. And those of us involved with the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence gave him the Lincoln Award for his efforts. We always hear about the fatalities due to handguns, but Jim Brady and myself and others have always talked too about the fact that there's 14 people who are permanently disabled in addition to the fatalities when it comes to handgun violence. And I know the president knows that. I ask you, because of that understanding, I ask you if you can get back to him about our concern about the fact that from several countries around the world, Chicago in particular is the recipient of numerous people from other countries who are maimed due to landmines. And with all the technology changes we have now for our military, why we are still dependent on landmines, which basically kill civilians or maim civilians, as a deterrent. If there's some way the policy could change on that.
I'll take that back to the president.
Couple more. Yes.
What are the next steps that the administration is going to be taking in regards to the growing concerns in Pakistan and India?
You know, you always look forward to a question like that and say, because security reasons, I can't tell you. I just wanted to do that and try it out. Look, I think that you had the top 5 countries, as you know, meet last week under China's chairmanship of, and come up with, I think, an evolving and developing plan to deal with the situation. As you probably saw the other day, Pakistan announced their moratorium. I think that you have a relationship. I participated in a meeting the president had with a number of outside advisors on the subcontinent of Asia, and I think that, you know, that policy would be inappropriate for me, obviously, to explain what it is at this point. It is the Secretary of State is dealing with this issue, as is the Deputy Secretary of State, and I think one of the things you got to do is literally walk these two countries and their leaders back from where they are and put they have a series of relationships and make sure those relationships are developed accordingly and a dialogue is developed so that you can literally put some stability back into that situation.
Yes, sir.
Ron, if you think back to 1991,
Please stay where you are.
all right, Bob Fogel. If you think back to 1991 or 92 and all the people that were involved in the campaign, it seems that those who went to Washington burnt out after 2 or 3 or 4 years. To what do you ascribe your perseverance for 7 years in Washington?
Being a sick middle child of a Jewish family.
Honesty finally surfaces.
No, well, look. Why? I mean, that's 50% of the answer. The other 50% is, well, first of all, I think you got to keep a balance in your life. And I try to do that, as Bob, you know, both my reading, my exercise, but most importantly, my family, and putting a wall around my family for my work because of the richness I get out of my immediate family as well as my brothers and my parents. I also think it's, you know, I believe, I didn't just deliver a speech, I believe in what I just said. And if you believe in the person you're working for, you believe he's making a difference, you can only, that is one of the reasons you can persevere. If I didn't believe in it, it was just a job. I think, you know, not that that's what happened to other people. It has a tremendous strain on you, there's no doubt. It takes a toll, both physical, but the emotional and psychological and intellectual reward clearly outweigh that. And I think that the day I drive through the Southwest gates and I don't have that tingle and that excitement, I know it's time to put up the jacket and say it's over, and the jersey and say it's over. I still have that. I think what this president has done, the roadmap he's given this country, the policies he's continued to put forward are exciting. And I think you know what, you know me well enough that I'm a competitive person. I think these are the right ideas. I think this is the right direction. And I don't want to see the other party, or the direction at least that they're presenting, to be the dominant party, because I don't think they have the dominant ideas that are correct and progressive enough to take this country into the 21st century. And given that, I still, get and receive emotional, psychological, and intellectual nourishment from daily battle that I put up with.
Very good answer. Two more questions. Marty Gleason in the back.
Rahm, you've been on the firing line in fundraising for a good part of your life. That's where I first met you. Do you have some thoughts about what can be pragmatically work in reforming what everyone agrees is just an outrageous system of funding campaigns, and let's just deal with the presidency at this point. It's certainly right from city council on up. Do you have some thoughts on that, and does the president have some views and a program that might be pursued?
Well, that's a timely subject, because you can either say they honestly are debating it in the House of Representatives, or at the time, or are not honestly debating it in the House of Representatives at this time. I think one of the goals you got to accomplish, I think the McCain-Feingold bill is the exact right approach. That's the one in the Senate. It has a copy in the Shays-Meehan bill in the House. I think, the basic goal there is to put more accountability and less money into the system. And I think that's, and not to favor either party in the way you write the rules, or to favor an incumbent over a challenger. That being set as your principal goals, I think those legislation achieve it, and actually are written towards that. I think the question you have to face if we can't succeed in the House this time that's going on, you have two, I think, roads to pick from. And it doesn't mean you're in a fork and you only can pick one. The president actually has, I think, as long as Congress isn't willing to act, has done some things he can do through the regulatory process. He wrote a letter to the FEC and asked it to consider, since it was the one that literally, through regulation, created the notion of soft money, to literally, as it opened the door on soft money, to now basically rewrite the rules, to close the door on soft money, what it can be used for, the size, etc., the size of the amount of the money, etc. If you get a chance, back page of the Wall Street Journal front section today is a story about how some Republicans in the Congress are angry at the council at the FEC for actually having ruled in favor and recommended an opinion in favor of the president's view. And I think that's one action. He's asked the Justice Department that when a case goes up that deals with Buckley versus Vallejo, reevaluating outside contribution and size of contributions, whether in fact that's constitutional. He's asked the Justice Department to file in that brief. There are things he can do regulatory. If we're not successful in passing comprehensive bipartisan legislation this session, I think one of the things that those who are in the political reform business need to look at is take a look and see what we can do in small, bite-sized steps, because you're asking a system to reform itself. And if it isn't willing to do it in a comprehensive fashion, as it did in 1974, can we do it in step-by-step approach that can literally, I think, reform the system, but not do it in a comprehensive fashion, but literally in a step-by-step. And I think that's one of the things you have to look at. I wouldn't throw in the towel yet on this year, but I think you have to look at it pragmatically. The chances of something passing are beginning, the window on that opportunity is beginning to close in a short period of time. And I think the principal goal is somebody who knows something about fundraising and knows something about the political system is you literally have to take money out of the system. There's too much money in the system. And that's got to be one of the goals of reform, and you got to set that goal.
To close, yes.
Stephen Fisher, could you offer thoughts about the patients in the right for healthcare?
Well, as a doctor's son, and as well as an advisor to the president, I'm for him. And I think we need him in this country. And I think that it will be in no short time, either this Congress or the next, my guess is this Congress, you will see legislation. I mean, you have a bipartisan consensus that exists both in the House and the Senate for a patient's Bill of Rights. The President's own commission had recommended some form of that. And I think that you will see, you definitely see legislation today. The question is whether the leadership in Congress is ready to take on this issue and address a real concern out there and a real problem out there. And they have the task in front of themselves to do that. they can choose progress or more partisanship. You have 230 members of the House, you only need 217, signed onto a discharge petition to move a piece of legislation. So it has both Democrats and Republicans. It's comprehensive. It's broad. That's just one. There's another vehicle. The question is the leadership in the Congress ready to take on an issue that the American people want them to take on? We are very supportive in pushing that in legislation. We've looked at a number of pieces of it and been generally supportive, but want the legislative process now to move forward.
Round of applause.